A story of kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections. Imagine this: a quiet highway, an overcast sky, and a small-town mechanic who believes in doing the right thing, no matter how small the act. Jack Harper never expected that stopping. To help a stranded driver with a flat tire would change his life forever. But what if that seemingly ordinary act of kindness set off a chain of events that would not only transform his world, but reveal that the woman he helped was hiding a secret worth billions? This is a story about more than cars and corporate ambition. It's about resilience, trust, and the surprising ways that lives can intersect. It's about a man rediscovering his purpose and a woman learning that leadership means more than power. And maybe, just maybe, it's about two people finding something they didn't know they were searching for. But before we dive into this heartfelt tale, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll never miss stories like this. Stories that touch your heart, make you think, and remind you of the extraordinary power of everyday kindness. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin this journey with a mechanic helped fix a stranger's flat tire. He had no idea that she was a billionaire. The afternoon sky hung heavy with grey clouds, casting a somber hue over the small town of Millstone. Jack Harper adjusted his worn work gloves as he wiped grease from his hands. The garage, his humble sanctuary, smelled of motor oil and metal, a scent that had become as familiar to him as the lines etched into his weathered face. For over 2 decades, Jack had been the go-to mechanic for the residents of Millstone, a town where everyone knew each other's names and secrets. Yet Jack had managed to keep his own pain tucked away, like the old tools gathering dust in the far corner of his shop. Jack's day had been long and grueling. The morning began with an emergency repair for a farmer's broken-down tractor, followed by a sedan with a mysterious rattle that took hours to diagnose. As the clock struck 6 p.m., Jack finally locked up the garage, his shoulders sagging under the weight of exhaustion and the invisible burden he carried every day. The memory of his late wife, Mary. Mary had been the light of his life, a beacon of hope during their years of struggle. Her laughter had filled the tiny home they once shared, her optimism a counterbalance to his pragmatic outlook. But cancer had stolen her away 5 years ago, leaving Jack with a mountain of medical bills and an emptiness he couldn't repair. As Jack drove his trusty old pickup truck home, the familiar ache of loss settled in his chest. The radio played softly in the background, but the music barely registered. Instead, his thoughts wandered to the bills piled on his kitchen table. The garage wasn't making enough to keep up with his expenses, and the idea of losing his business, the last piece of stability in his life, kept him awake at night. As Jack turned onto the quiet stretch of highway leading to his house, a glint of silver caught his eye. A sleek luxury car sat motionless on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking like a distress signal. Jack's hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. He considered driving past. After all, he was tired, and the driver likely had roadside assistance. But something about the scene made him slow down. Pulling over a few feet ahead of the car, Jack stepped out and took in the sight. The vehicle was a brand-new sedan, foreign-made, the kind of car he rarely worked on. Its pristine exterior contrasted sharply with the lone figure standing beside it, a woman dressed in a tailored navy suit, her hair swept neatly into a bun. She looked out of place against the dusty, unremarkable backdrop of Millstone's outskirts. The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to relief as Jack approached. "Everything all right here?" he called out, keeping his tone friendly but cautious. The woman hesitated for a moment before responding. "Not really. My tire's flat and She paused, glancing down at her phone. "I don't have service out here to call for help." Jack nodded, his practiced eyes already assessing the problem. "Looks like you've got a bad puncture. Got a spare?" "I think so," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I don't know how to change it." Jack allowed himself a small smile. No worries, I've got you covered. Jack fetched his toolbox from the truck and knelt beside the luxury car. As he worked, he noticed the woman shifting uneasily, her polished shoes crunching against the gravel. You passing through? He asked, trying to make conversation. She nodded. Yes, heading to a meeting in the city, but now I'll be late. Her voice was sharp, more from frustration than rudeness. Meetings can wait, Jack said matter-of-factly. Safety first. The woman raised an eyebrow, then offered a faint smile. I suppose you're right. The work didn't take long. Jack's hands moved with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Within minutes, the spare tire was in place, and he tightened the lug nuts with precision. Standing, he wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face the woman. All he said, should get you where you need to go. The woman pulled out her wallet and extended a crisp bill toward him. Here for your trouble. Jack shook his head. Keep it, just glad I could help. She looked at him, puzzled. You're sure? Jack nodded. I've been stuck on the side of the road before. It's not fun. Pay it forward. For a moment. She said nothing, studying him as though trying to understand his motives. Finally, she slipped the money back into her wallet. Thank you, she said, her tone softer now. I mean it. Jack tipped his hat. Take care out there. He turned back to his truck, pausing only when she called after him. What's your name? She asked. Jack, he replied. Jack Harper. I run the garage in town, Harper's Auto. She nodded, almost thoughtfully. Susan, she said. Susan Harper. Jack chuckled. Looks like we're distant cousins, huh? Susan smiled. At his joke, the tension in her posture easing. Maybe so. With that, Jack climbed into his truck and drove away, the encounter lingering in his mind. He didn't know who Susan Harper was or why she seemed so different from anyone he'd met before, but something told him this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. As Jack's truck disappeared into the distance, Susan stood by her car, her thoughts racing. She had intended to brush this off as an ordinary inconvenience, but there was something about Jack, his humility, his kindness, that stayed with her. Little did either of them know, this simple act of goodwill was about to set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Susan Harper tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her manicured nails tapping lightly against the leather. The flat tire had ruined her carefully planned schedule. She had mapped out every detail of her day, down to the minute, for an important investor meeting in the city. Now the luxury sedan she trusted had betrayed her, stranding her in a small-town backroad. The irony wasn't lost on her. Someone who built her career on precision and efficiency was now helplessly waiting for a stranger's assistance. As the man approached her car, Susan felt a wave of apprehension. She wasn't used to relying on others, especially not in situations where she had no control. He introduced himself as Jack, his voice steady and kind, though his appearance contrasted sharply with the polished professional she encountered daily. Dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans smudged with grease, Jack exuded a no-nonsense demeanor. Susan found herself torn between gratitude and unease. As Jack knelt to examine the tire, Susan took a moment to study him. He worked with calm precision, his calloused hands moving as though he had done this 1,000 times. Just a puncture, he said matter-of-factly. Your spares in the trunk? Susan hesitated, feeling slightly embarrassed. I think so. I don't usually handle these things. Jack chuckled, not unkindly. No worries. That's what I'm here for. Susan retrieved the spare tire and tools, watching as Jack expertly removed the damaged tire. The small-town mechanic and the high-powered CEO stood in stark contrast. Jack's movements were deliberate, his focus unwavering, while Susan shifted uncomfortably, her designer heels sinking slightly into the gravel. You're passing through? Jack asked, breaking the silence. Susan nodded. Yes, heading to a meeting in the city, but I'm late now. Her tone carried the clipped efficiency she used in boardrooms, but Jack didn't seem fazed. "Meetings can wait," he replied without looking up. "Getting you back on the road safely is what matters." Susan raised an eyebrow. She wasn't accustomed to such a laid-back attitude, but there was something disarming about Jack's straightforwardness. In her world, every minute lost was a potential disaster, yet Jack seemed to operate in a rhythm untouched by urgency. As Jack tightened the lug nuts on the spare tire, Susan's phone buzzed incessantly in her hand. Notifications from her assistant and board members flashed across the screen, each one reminding her of the stakes of her delayed arrival. The project she was spearheading, a revolutionary automotive technology, wasn't just another deal. It was her legacy. Investors were growing impatient, and the board had already expressed doubts about her ability to deliver on time. Susan's chest tightened as she glanced at the texts. The stakes were too high for mistakes. Losing this deal would mean more than professional failure. It would confirm every whispered doubt about her leadership, every prejudgment about her being too young or inexperienced to handle the pressure. Jack noticed her tense expression. "Everything okay?" he asked, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag. Susan forced a smile. "Just work," she said curtly. "Sounds important," Jack replied. "But you can't solve problems if you're stuck on the side of the road." His words were simple, but they struck a chord. Susan had built her career on solving problems, yet here she was, utterly reliant on a stranger's kindness. When Jack finished, he stood back and surveyed his work. "That should hold up fine until you can get it properly replaced." Susan retrieved her wallet, pulling out a crisp bill. "Here," she said, extending it toward him. "Thank you for your time," Jack shook his head. "No need for that. I'm just glad I could help." The gesture caught her off guard. In Susan's world, nothing came for free. Every action had a price, every favor, an expectation. "You're sure?" she asked, lowering the bill slightly. Jack smiled, his face lined with years of hard work and quiet humility. "I've been stuck on the side of the road before. It's no fun. Just pay it forward when you get the chance." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. For a moment, Susan felt something unfamiliar, a sense of connection, however fleeting, with someone who expected nothing from her. It was a stark contrast to the transactional nature of her everyday life. As Susan prepared to leave, she paused. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jack Harper," he replied. "I run a garage here in town, Harper's Auto. If you ever need more help, stop by." Susan nodded, her mind already filing away the name. "Susan Harper," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Harper? Guess that makes us long-lost relatives," he joked. For the first time all day, Susan laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh. Maybe so. As she slid back into her car and started the engine, she glanced at Jack one last time. There was something about him, his unassuming demeanor, his quiet generosity, that lingered in her thoughts as she drove away. She had expected this encounter to be an inconvenience, a minor setback in her tightly controlled schedule. Instead, it left her unsettled in a way she couldn't quite explain. As Susan merged onto the highway, her phone buzzed with a call from her assistant. She took a deep breath before answering, her mind still on the mechanic who had helped her. Something about him felt different, authentic, in a way that was rare in her world. What she didn't know was that Jack Harper, the small-town mechanic, had just set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about success, kindness, and what truly mattered in life. The sun had set by the time Jack pulled his truck into the gravel driveway of his modest home. The house, though small, had always been a place of warmth and comfort when Mary was alive. Now, it felt like a hollow shell, its silence echoing the void in his heart. Jack sat in the truck for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on him. His encounter with Susan Harper lingered in his mind, not because of her polished demeanor or the luxury car she drove, but because of the subtle reminder she brought that life had moved on, even if he hadn't. As Jack stepped inside, the scent of motor oil clung to his clothes, mingling with the faint aroma of the lavender candles Mary used to love. Her presence was everywhere. In the neatly folded quilt draped over the couch, the framed photos on the mantel, and the garden she had tended with so much care. Jack walked past it all and into the kitchen, where a stack of unopened bills awaited him on the counter. Sinking into a chair, he ran a hand through his greying hair. The bills weren't just numbers to him. They were a reminder of the endless nights spent at Mary's bedside, holding her hand and promising that he'd do whatever it took to save her. When the treatments failed, the debt remained, a monument to his inability to keep that promise. Jack exhaled slowly, the ache in his chest a familiar companion. He glanced at the garage ledger he had brought home, the numbers as grim as the bills. Business had slowed over the years, with newer, bigger repair shops pulling customers away. His garage, Harper's Auto, was barely surviving, much like him. The thought of closing the garage had crossed Jack's mind more than once, but he couldn't bring himself to let go. The shop was more than a business. It was the life he and Mary had built together. It was where they had spent countless evenings, her laughter filling the air as she teased him about his stubborn perfectionism. Losing the garage would feel like losing another piece of her. Jack's thoughts drifted to Susan, the woman he had helped earlier. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was just a flat tire. But there was something about her. Something in the way she carried herself that left an impression. She reminded him of the corporate world he had once been part of, a world he had left behind to care for Mary. He wondered briefly what had brought her to his small corner of the world. But the thought passed quickly. She was likely back in the city now, her life far removed from his. Meanwhile, Susan Harper sat in her sleek office overlooking the city skyline, her mind racing as she scrolled through her phone. Her assistant had already updated her on the investors, growing impatience, and she knew the board meeting tomorrow would be brutal. The automotive technology project she had been working on, a cutting-edge fuel efficiency system, was behind schedule, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Davis, the senior manager overseeing the engineering team, had been vocal about his doubts. "Harper's in over her head," he had said in a recent meeting, his words dripping with condescension. Susan had felt the stares of the other board members, their silence speaking volumes. She had fought hard to earn her position, battling assumptions that she was too young, too inexperienced. Now every delay felt like validation for her critics. Leaning back in her chair, Susan closed her eyes for a moment. The day's events replayed in her mind, her car breaking down, the mechanic who had stopped to help. Jack Harper. There was something about him that intrigued her. His demeanor had been calm, unflappable, even when she had been curt and preoccupied. He had done what needed to be done without expecting anything in return, a rarity in her world. On a whim, Susan typed Harper's Auto Millstone into her laptop. The search yielded a simple website, outdated but functional, with a photo of Jack standing in front of the garage. His bio was short and straightforward. Jack Harper, owner and mechanic with over 25 years of experience, dedicated to honest, reliable service. Scrolling further, Susan found a link to a local news article from years ago. The headline caught her attention. "Former engineer turns small town, mechanic to care for ailing wife." Her curiosity piqued. Susan clicked the link. The article detailed Jack's transition from a promising career as a mechanical engineer at a major corporation to running a small garage in Millstone. The reason for the shift was heart-wrenching: his wife's battle with cancer. Susan sat back, the weight of the story settling over her. Jack wasn't just a mechanic. He was someone who had made immense sacrifices, someone who understood what it meant to prioritize what truly mattered. For a moment, She felt a pang of guilt for her initial assumptions about him. She had seen only the surface, but now she realized there was so much more. As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Susan stared at Jack's photo on her screen. An idea began to form in her mind, one that both excited and unsettled her. What if this small-town mechanic, with his wealth of experience and unshakable integrity, could be the answer to the challenges she faced in her project? Susan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Jack Harper," she murmured, "I think we're going to meet again." The morning sun filtered through the windows of Harper's Auto, casting warm light over the array of tools and spare parts that filled the small garage. Jack was bent over the hood of a rusted pickup truck, his hands steady as he tightened a loose bolt. The rhythmic sound of a wrench turning was interrupted by the low rumble of an approaching car. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and stepped out of the garage to see what looked like a convoy pulling into his driveway. 3 cars, sleek and polished, came to a halt in the gravel lot. The lead vehicle was the same luxury sedan Jack had helped just days ago. As the doors opened, well-dressed professionals stepped out, their crisp suits and polished shoes a stark contrast to Jack's grease-stained coveralls. At the center of it all was Susan Harper, her sharp navy blazer and confident stride exuding authority. Jack's brows furrowed as he walked toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Susan," he greeted, the surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you back here?" Susan's lips curved into a polite smile. "Good morning, Jack. I hope I'm not interrupting." Jack glanced at the small crowd behind her. "Depends on what all this is about." Susan chuckled lightly, gesturing for her team to wait by the cars. She approached Jack alone, her tone softening. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me the other day, but more importantly, I have a proposition for you." Jack folded his arms across his chest, his guarded expression betraying a flicker of curiosity. "A proposition?" Susan nodded. "I've done some research about you. Your background, your work as an engineer before you started this garage." Jack stiffened slightly. He hadn't expected her to dig into his past, let alone bring it up so directly. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice tinged with reluctance. "I'm just a small-town mechanic now." "Maybe," Susan replied, her gaze steady, "but your expertise is exactly what my team needs." She explained her project, a groundbreaking fuel efficiency system that had the potential to revolutionize the automotive industry. Her team had hit a roadblock, an issue with the mechanics of the prototype that her engineers couldn't seem to solve. "I believe your practical experience combined with your engineering background could make all the difference," she concluded. Jack shook his head, his expression wary. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the guy you're looking for. I've been out of that world for years." "Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person," Susan countered. "You see things differently, approach problems from angles others don't consider." Jack hesitated, his mind racing. The idea of stepping into the high-pressure corporate world he'd left behind felt overwhelming. He had built his life around the simplicity of fixing cars and helping his community. The thought of trading that for sterile boardrooms and endless deadlines filled him with unease. "Why me?" he asked finally. "You've got a whole team of professionals. Why come all the way out here for a guy like me?" Susan's expression softened. "Because I trust you, Jack. I saw how you worked, how you cared. I need someone who's honest and dependable, someone who won't just tell me what I want to hear." Her words hung in the air, but Jack couldn't shake the doubts gnawing at him. "It's not just about trust," he said quietly. "I've got responsibilities here. This garage is my livelihood." For the first time, Susan's polished facade seemed to crack. She glanced back at her team, then turned her attention fully to Jack. "I understand, and I wouldn't ask if this wasn't important to me and to a lot of other people." She paused, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "The truth is, I'm under immense pressure. If this project fails, it won't just be my career on the line. Hundreds of jobs depend on this technology succeeding, and honestly, I can't do it alone." Jack studied her, noticing the weight she carried in her eyes. It was a look he recognized, the same burden he had felt when caring for Mary, when every decision seemed to hold the fate of someone else's future. Susan wasn't just another CEO. She was someone fighting to protect something bigger than herself. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a lot to think about. I'm not asking for an answer right now," Susan said quickly. "But please consider it. You'd be making a real difference." Jack nodded slowly, still unsure but unwilling to dismiss her outright. "All right," he said finally. "I'll think about it." Susan's expression brightened, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. "Thank you, Jack. That's all I can ask." As Susan and her team drove away, the garage felt quieter than usual. Jack stood in the lot, staring at the spot where her and car had been. The weight of her words lingered, intertwining with his own doubts and fears. He had spent so long believing his life was limited to this small town, this garage. Now, for the first time in years, he wondered if there might still be a bigger purpose waiting for him. Later that evening, Jack sat at his kitchen table, the proposal replaying in his mind. He glanced at the framed photo of Mary, her smile frozen. In time. "What would you do, Mary?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. The question hung unanswered in the quiet room, but deep down, Jack knew that the choice he made could change everything. Jack Harper sat at his kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee in his hands. It had gone cold long ago, but he hadn't noticed. His mind was too busy replaying Susan Harper's proposal, the chance to step into a world he'd left behind, a world that felt as distant now as the stars outside his window. The garage was silent except for the occasional creak of the old building settling in the cool night air. Usually this quiet was a comfort, but tonight it pressed on Jack like a heavy weight. Jack leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the photo of Mary on the counter. Her smile was frozen in time, but Jack could almost hear her voice, teasing him for always overthinking things. "What do you think, Mary?" he muttered, running a hand over his face. "Am I crazy for even considering this?" It wasn't just fear holding him back. It was the life he'd built around his loss. The garage had been his anchor, the thing that kept him grounded after her passing. He had poured himself into the work, fixing engines and helping neighbors, as if every repair he made could mend a piece of his broken heart. But Susan's words had stirred something in him, something he thought he'd buried, the idea that he could still do more, that his life could have meaning beyond this small town. Yet doubt lingered. Jack hadn't worked in a high-stakes environment in over a decade. The idea of stepping into Susan's corporate world, where every mistake could cost millions, was enough to make his stomach churn. What if he failed? What if he wasn't the man she thought he was? Across the city, Susan Harper sat at her desk, surrounded by files and blueprints. The board meeting that morning had been brutal. Davis, as usual, had been the loudest critic. "Harper's gamble is going to sink this company," he had said, his voice dripping with disdain. The other members had nodded along, their skepticism palpable. Susan had stood her ground, but the pressure was wearing her down. The project wasn't just about proving herself. It was about securing the future of the company and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. She had bet everything on this, and now she was asking a small-town mechanic to help her win. She glanced at the photo on her desk, a picture of her parents standing in front of the family's first car, a beat-up sedan they'd worked tirelessly to afford. It was that car and the sacrifices it represented that had inspired her to pursue a career in the automotive industry. She had promised herself she'd honor their legacy by building something that mattered. But tonight, the weight of that promise felt heavier than ever. The next day, Jack found himself in the local diner, nursing a cup of coffee as he waited for his breakfast. His old friend and former co-worker Tom slid into the seat across from him. Tom had been one of the few people who knew Jack before. Millstone, back when he was a promising engineer with a future as bright as the cars he helped design. "You look like you've got something on your mind," Tom said, eyeing Jack over the rim of his mug. Jack hesitated before sharing the story of Susan's visit. Tom listened intently, nodding as Jack described the opportunity and his reservations. "So, what's stopping you?" Tom asked when Jack finished. Jack sighed. "It's not that simple, Tom. What if I'm not cut out for that world anymore? What if I let her down?" Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "Jack, you're the smartest guy I know. You've spent years solving problems no one else could figure out. And let's face it, you've been coasting here. Maybe it's time to see what you're really capable of again." Jack stared into his coffee, Tom's words sinking in. He hated to admit it, but his friend was right. The garage had become a safe harbor, but maybe it was time to sail into deeper waters. That evening, Jack stood in his garage, the familiar smell of oil and grease filling the air. He ran his hand over the hood of an old car, one of the first he had ever fixed in Millstone. This place had been his sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage. The world Susan was offering scared him, but the idea of staying here, watching life pass him by, scared him more. He pulled out the business card. Susan had left, staring at the number printed in neat black letters. Taking a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed. Susan answered on the second ring. "Jack," she said, her voice both surprised and hopeful. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you." Jack hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "I've been thinking about your offer," he began, "and I think I'm willing to give it a shot. But I have one condition." "Of course," Susan said quickly. "What is it?" "I can't abandon this garage," Jack said firmly. "It's part of who I am. If I'm going to help you, I need to know I can still be here for my community." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Susan replied, "I understand. We'll work something out." As Jack hung up, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over him. He had taken the first step, but the journey ahead was uncharted territory. For the first time in years, Jack felt a spark of excitement, an unfamiliar but welcome sensation. Whatever came next, he knew it would test him in ways he hadn't faced in a long time. Meanwhile, in her office, Susan stared at the phone in her hand, a small smile playing on her lips. Jack Harper was in, and she had a feeling his involvement was about to change everything. The gleaming glass doors of Harper Automotive headquarters loomed in front of Jack Harper like a portal to another world. The modern skyscraper was a stark contrast to the humble garage he called home, and as he stepped inside, the polished marble, floors and hum of activity instantly overwhelmed him. Suited professionals moved with purpose, their conversations peppered with technical jargon and business lingo that felt foreign to Jack. Jack adjusted the collar of his borrowed jacket, a piece of advice from Susan to dress the part. He felt out of place, a mechanic in a sea of polished executives, but Susan's words echoed in his mind. "I trust you." A young assistant named Claire greeted Jack at the reception desk, her tablet in hand and a polite but curious smile on her face. "Mr. Harper, welcome. Ms. Harper asked me to show you to the lab." Jack nodded, following Claire down a long corridor lined with sleek offices and minimalist artwork. The further they went, the more Jack's apprehension grew. His hands brushed against his jacket pockets, searching for the comfort of his usual tools, but instead he found only the faint reminder that he was out of his element. The lab was a sprawling space filled with cutting-edge equipment and a team of engineers buzzing with activity. Susan was already there, standing at the center of the room as she spoke with her lead engineer. When she saw Jack, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Jack, glad you could make it," Susan said, her voice carrying over the hum of machinery. Jack offered a small nod, his eyes scanning the room. "This is impressive," he admitted, though his tone betrayed his unease. Susan gestured for him to join her. "Let me show you what we're working on." The centerpiece of the lab was a prototype vehicle, sleek and futuristic, with its hood open to reveal an intricate system of wires and components. Susan explained the ambitious goal of the project, a fuel efficiency system that could reduce emissions and revolutionize the industry. As she spoke, Jack found himself drawn to the mechanical elements. Despite the advanced technology, there was something familiar about the components, a reminder that at its core, every machine had the same basic principles. "What do you think?" Susan asked, her tone eager but cautious. Jack ran a hand along the edge of the prototype, his eyes narrowing as he studied the layout. "It's ambitious," he said finally, "but I can see where the problems might be." Susan's eyes lit up. "That's exactly why I brought you here." Not everyone in the room shared Susan's enthusiasm. From the corner of the lab, Davis stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. His tailored suit and confident smirk made him seem larger than life. "So, this is the mechanic?" Davis said, his tone dripping with condescension. Jack straightened, meeting Davis's gaze without flinching. "That's right." Davis raised an eyebrow. "Susan, I'm not sure why you think a small-town mechanic is the solution to our problems. This is cutting-edge technology, not some old pickup truck." Susan's jaw tightened, but Jack spoke before she could. "You're right," he said calmly. "I'm not a scientist or an engineer anymore, but I've spent decades figuring out how to make things work in the real world. And from what I can see, that's exactly what your prototype needs." The room fell silent for a moment. Davis looked taken aback, but he quickly recovered, a sly smile spreading across his face. "We'll see," he said, turning to Susan. "Let's hope your gamble pays off." As the day went on, Jack worked alongside the team, quietly observing and asking questions. While many of the younger engineers were skeptical at first, Jack's hands-on approach began to earn their respect. When they ran into a problem with the prototype's cooling system, Jack suggested a simple adjustment that solved the issue, a fix that had eluded the team for weeks. "You're not bad at this," one of the engineers said with a grin. Jack chuckled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Maybe he wasn't as out of place as he had thought. Later that evening, as the lab emptied out, Susan approached Jack, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him, leaning against the edge of a workbench. "You held your own today," she said, her voice warm. "Davis can be difficult, but you didn't let him rattle you." Jack took a sip of his coffee, his eyes meeting hers. "I've dealt with worse," he said with a faint smile. "But this place, it's a lot to take in." Susan nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It is. And I know it's not easy, stepping into a world like this. But I brought you here because I believe in what you can do. Don't let people like Davis make you doubt that." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment Jack saw a different side of her. One that wasn't the polished CEO, but someone who understood the weight of expectations and the courage it took to face them. As Jack left the building that night, the city lights reflecting off the towering glass windows, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. He wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of purpose. Back in the lab, Davis watched Susan from the shadows, a calculating look in his eyes. He wasn't done testing Jack or Susan. Whatever their next move was, he intended to stay one step ahead. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with tension, the air almost crackling as Davis finished his critique. "With all due respect, Susan," he said, his tone anything but respectful, "bringing in an untested outsider with no recent experience is a reckless gamble. This project is too important to entrust to sentimentality." Jack sat at the edge of the long conference table, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The words stung, but he kept his face neutral. Beside him, Susan remained calm, her expression unyielding as she addressed the room. "Davis," she began, her voice measured but firm. "This project isn't about sentimentality. It's about finding solutions. Jack brings decades of practical expertise, and in the short time he's been here, he's already contributed ideas that have moved us forward." Davis leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Forward, or just further off course?" A murmur rippled through the room, and Jack felt every pair of eyes land on him. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but Susan raised a hand subtly, signaling him to wait. The meeting adjourned with no definitive resolution, but the tension between Susan and Davis was palpable. Back in the lab, Jack threw himself into the work. The team was tackling a persistent overheating issue with the prototype's fuel efficiency system, and Jack had been quietly observing their approach. "Has anyone considered redirecting the coolant flow through a secondary channel?" Jack asked, pointing to a schematic on the screen. The room fell silent. One of the younger engineers, a man named Eric, frowned. "That would disrupt the primary flow." "Not if you reroute it here," Jack said, tracing a line with his finger. "It's not the most conventional solution, but it could balance the pressure without overloading the system." Eric exchanged glances with another engineer before nodding slowly. "It's worth a try." Within hours, Jack's suggestion was implemented, and for the first time in weeks, the prototype ran without overheating. The lab erupted in cheers, and Susan, who had been observing quietly from the corner, allowed herself a rare smile. "Good work, Jack," she said, as the team celebrated. Later that evening, Susan and Jack found themselves alone in the lab. She handed him a bottle of water, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for today, but for sticking with this." Jack shrugged, taking a sip. "It's what I do. Fix things." Susan chuckled, but the humor didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wish it were that simple." Jack tilted his head, sensing there was more to her words. "Something on your mind?" Susan hesitated before sitting on a nearby stool, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Davis and we used to be allies. When I first joined the company, he mentored me. I thought we were working toward the same goals, but as I moved up, things changed. He wanted control, and when he realized I wasn't going to be a puppet for him, he turned on me." Jack leaned against the workbench, his arms crossed. "So now it's personal." "For him, yes," Susan said, her voice soft. "For me, it's about proving that I deserve to be here, that I can lead without compromising my integrity." Jack nodded, his respect for Susan deepening. She wasn't just fighting for her project, she was fighting for her place in a world that had tried to sideline her. Across the building, Davis sat in his office, his jaw tight as he reviewed the latest test results. Jack's solution had worked, and the team's morale had shifted. It wasn't just about the project anymore, it was about loyalty. Susan was gaining ground, and Davis could feel the balance of power slipping. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Jack and Susan thought today was a victory, they were mistaken. Davis wasn't finished. He began drafting an email, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he formulated his next move. This wasn't just about the prototype, it was about control, and Davis had no intention of losing. As the night wore on, Jack and Susan continued to work in the lab, the hum of machinery their only companion. For the first time, the conversation between them drifted beyond the project. Susan shared stories of her parents and the car that had inspired her career. Jack opened up about his life with Mary, the garage, and the sense of purpose he had lost. After her passing, "I guess I just never thought I'd be doing something like this again," Jack admitted, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Susan smiled. "You're good at it, Jack, better than most people I've worked with." Her words carried a sincerity that caught him off guard. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared struggles, mutual respect, and the beginnings of a connection neither had expected. As Jack left the building that night, the city lights casting long shadows across the parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than he'd realized. Susan wasn't just fighting for her project, she was fighting for her future, and now so was he. In his office, Davis hit send on his email, a satisfied smile on his face. The message was subtle but calculated, designed to plant doubt in the minds of the board about Susan's leadership and Jack's involvement. The game was far from over. The tension in the air was palpable as the team gathered in the main testing room for the prototype's first live trial before the board of directors. The room was buzzing with anticipation, the culmination of months of work boiling down to this moment. Jack stood near the back, his hands folded tightly in front of him, his mind replaying every adjustment and calculation they had made over the last few weeks. Susan stood at the head of the room, exuding confidence despite the stakes. Her gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Jack. She gave him a small nod, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. "Let's begin," she said, her voice calm but firm. The test started smoothly. The prototype's engine purred to life, the fuel efficiency system humming as expected. For a moment, there was a glimmer of hope. The board members leaned forward in their seats, nodding in approval. But then, without warning, a loud metallic clunk echoed through the room. The engine sputtered, and the system's dashboard lit up with error messages. Panic rippled through the team. Jack moved quickly to the control panel, his fingers flying across the interface. "It's overheating," he muttered, his voice tight with urgency. He ran diagnostics, but the problem only worsened. Within minutes, the system shut down entirely, leaving the room in an uncomfortable silence. Davis, who had been standing near the board members, took a step forward. "It seems we've encountered a critical failure," he said smoothly. His tone was measured, but the satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. "This is precisely the risk of relying on unconventional methods." Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had checked every component, every connection. Something about this didn't add up. As the board members murmured amongst themselves, Susan stepped forward. "We'll investigate the issue and resolve it immediately," she said, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. One of the directors, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Carter, folded her arms. "This is a significant setback, Ms. Harper. Your timeline is already tight, and now this. I hope you understand the gravity of this situation." Susan nodded. "I do, and I assure you, we'll address this promptly." Jack remained silent. As the meeting concluded, the sting of Davis's thinly veiled accusation still fresh in his mind. As the room cleared, he approached Susan. "I need to go over the system again," he said. "Something isn't right." Susan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take your time, Jack. We'll figure this out." Back in the lab, Jack tore into the prototype with methodical precision. Hours passed as he examined every inch of the system, his frustration growing with each dead end. Finally, he found it, a small, deliberate alteration in the coolant system. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to cause the catastrophic failure they had witnessed. Jack's jaw tightened as he traced the modification back to its source. There was no doubt in his mind. This was sabotage. "Susan," he called, his voice echoing through the empty lab. She appeared moments later, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "What is it?" she asked. Jack pointed to the altered component. "This wasn't a mistake. Someone did this on purpose." Susan's face hardened. "Davis." Jack nodded. "It has to be. He's been waiting for a chance to undermine us." Susan stared at the component, her mind racing. "We need to confront him," she said. "Not yet," Jack replied. "If we go to the board now, it'll look like we're deflecting blame. We need proof, something undeniable." Susan hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. But how do we get it?" Jack thought for a moment. "Davis is smart, but arrogance is his weakness. He won't cover his tracks as well as he thinks. Let me handle this." The following day, Jack worked quietly in the lab, combing through the system logs. His persistence paid off when he found what he was looking for, a time-stamped access log showing unauthorized adjustments made by Davis the night before the trial. Armed with the evidence, Jack and Susan approached Davis in his office. Susan held the access log in her hand, her expression steely. "Care to explain this?" she asked, dropping the papers onto his desk. Davis glanced at the documents, his smirk faltering for a brief moment before he recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly. "Anyone could have accessed the system, but not everyone has your clearance level," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "You sabotaged the prototype." Davis leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Even if I did, do you really think the board will believe you over me? This isn't just about the project, Susan. It's about your judgment, your leadership." "You're in over your head." Susan stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "I've worked too hard to let someone like you tear this down. The board will hear the truth." Davis's smirk disappeared entirely as Susan and Jack left the office, their resolve unshaken. That evening, Susan called an emergency meeting with the board. She presented the evidence of sabotage, her voice steady as she detailed Davis's actions. The board, though initially skeptical, couldn't deny the proof. Davis was suspended pending further investigation, but the damage had been done. The project timeline was now dangerously tight, and the pressure to succeed had never been greater. Jack sat in the quiet lab, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He knew the next trial would be their last chance. Failure wasn't an option. Not for Susan, not for the project, and not for the second chance he had been given. The atmosphere in the lab was a mix of tension and quiet determination. The final trial was scheduled for tomorrow, and every member of the team was focused on their task, driven by the knowledge that this was their last chance. Jack Harper stood at the workbench, his hands steady as he double-checked the adjustments they had made to the prototype's cooling system. Despite the pressure, his years of experience had taught him that precision mattered more than speed. Susan Harper moved through the lab like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, her calm yet commanding presence keeping the team focused. Though she appeared composed, the weight of the board's expectations and the shadow of Davis's sabotage lingered in her mind. She paused beside Jack, watching him work for a moment. "How's it looking?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Jack glanced up, his expression thoughtful. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to this machine to hold up its end of the bargain." Susan nodded, sensing his underlying doubt. "Jack, you've brought us this far. I trust you." Her words lingered in the air as she walked away, leaving Jack to wonder if he could live up to the trust she had placed in him. As the night wore on, the lab emptied out, leaving only Jack and a handful of engineers working through the final details. Jack couldn't shake the nagging thought that he might have missed something. The stakes were too high for even the smallest oversight. He leaned over the prototype, his eyes scanning every component with meticulous care. "Still here?" Susan's voice startled him. She held 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside him. Jack straightened, rubbing the back of his neck. Just making sure everything's in place, she smiled faintly. You've already done more than anyone expected. Jack shook his head. That doesn't mean it's enough. Susan studied him for a moment. You're harder on yourself than anyone else is. But I've seen what you're capable of, Jack. If anyone can make this work, it's you. The sincerity in her voice struck a chord. Jack nodded, the smallest hint of a smile crossing his face. Let's hope you're right. The next morning, the lab was transformed into a stage. The board of directors, investors, and even some press members had gathered to witness the final trial. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Jack stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed tightly as he watched Susan address the crowd. This project represents not only innovation, but a commitment to a more sustainable future, Susan said confidently. Today, we'll demonstrate what Harper Automotive is capable of. As the team prepared the prototype, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Eric, the young engineer who had initially doubted him. We've got this, Eric said, a small smile breaking the tension. Jack nodded, feeling a flicker of pride. He had earned their respect, and now it was time to deliver. The engine roared to life, its hum steady and powerful. The room fell silent as the data streamed across the monitors. Every reading was within range, every system functioning as intended. For the first time in weeks, the prototype was running flawlessly. Jack watched intently, his heart pounding, as the fuel efficiency numbers climbed higher than they had ever achieved in previous trials. The board members leaned in, their skepticism giving way to astonishment. Is this correct? One of them asked, pointing to the screen. Susan smiled, her confidence returning. It is. Jack allowed himself a deep breath of relief, his shoulders relaxing as the trial continued without a hitch. The prototype had exceeded expectations, proving the viability of the technology. The room erupted in applause as the trial concluded, and Susan turned to Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude. We did it, she said. Jack nodded, a rare smile spreading across his face. Yeah, we did. As the celebration continued, Susan approached the podium to address the room. This success wouldn't have been possible without the hard work and dedication of our team, she said. But there's one person who deserves special recognition. Jack Harper brought not just expertise, but a perspective that pushed us to think differently. He reminded us that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about people. The key applause that followed was louder than Jack expected. He felt a flush of pride, but also a sense of humility. This wasn't just a victory for the project, it was a reminder of what he was capable of. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Jack and Susan stood in the now quiet lab. She handed him a glass of champagne, her smile softer than before. To second chances, she said. Jack raised his glass, his gaze meeting hers. To moving forward. For a moment, the noise of the outside world faded away, leaving just the two of them. Susan hesitated, her expression turning thoughtful. You know, I wasn't sure what to expect when I asked you to join this project. But I've learned a lot from you, Jack, more than just about cars. Jack chuckled lightly. You're not so bad yourself. Her laughter was warm, and for the first time, Jack saw a side of Susan that felt less like a CEO and more like a person who had faced her own battles. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, the tension of the day, melting into something more comfortable. As Jack left the building, the weight that had rested on his shoulders for so long seemed lighter. He glanced back at the towering glass structure, a faint smile on his lips. This wasn't the end, far from it. Back in the lab, Susan watched him from the window, her thoughts swirling. She had asked Jack to help her fix a car, but somehow he had fixed much more than that. And as she turned away, a single thought lingered. Maybe this is just the beginning. The morning light filtered through the windows of Harper's Auto, casting long shadows across the garage floor. Jack Harper stood by his workbench, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The quiet hum of activity outside, birds, chirping, the occasional rumble of a car, was a welcome contrast to the intense weeks he had spent in the city. Here in his small garage, Jack felt at home. But something had shifted. As he glanced at the tools neatly arranged on the wall, he realized they no longer felt like the limits of his world. Instead, they were a reminder of where he had come from and what he had accomplished. Jack set his coffee down and picked up a wrench, turning it over in his hands. The journey with Susan Harper's project had challenged him in ways he hadn't thought possible. It had reignited a part of himself he thought he had lost. The problem solver, the innovator, the man who could make things work against all odds. More than that, it had taught him to trust again, not just in others, but in himself. The bell above the garage door jingled, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He turned to see Susan stepping inside, a warm smile on her face. She was dressed casually, her usual sharp business attire replaced with a comfortable sweater and jeans. It was a side of her he hadn't seen before. "Morning, Jack," Susan said, her tone light. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Jack replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you all the way out here?" Susan stepped aside, revealing a classic car parked just outside the garage. Its sleek lines and polished finish glinted in the sunlight, a picture of timeless elegance. Jack's eyes widened as he took it in. "This," Susan said, her smile softening, "a little thank you for everything you've done. I had it restored. It's a model my father loved. Thought you might appreciate it." Jack walked outside, his fingers grazing the car's hood. It was a masterpiece, every detail perfect. "Susan, this is incredible. I don't even know what to say." She laughed lightly. "You've already said enough. Besides, you've earned it." As they stood by the car, an easy silence settled between them. Jack leaned against the fender, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "You know," he began, "when you showed up with that flat tire, I thought it was just another day at the garage. Didn't expect it to change so much." Susan tilted her head, her eyes meeting his. "Neither did I. You've taught me a lot, Jack, about trust, about seeing the bigger picture, and about not being afraid to ask for help." Jack chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Guess we both had something to learn." There was a pause, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Susan hesitated, then added, "You know, the project isn't the only reason I came out here. I was wondering if you'd ever consider working with us again. Maybe not full-time, but you have a knack for solving problems, Jack. We could use that." Jack looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in a thoughtful smile. "I'll think about it," he said, his tone teasing but sincere. Susan nodded, her smile deepening. "That's all I ask." As Susan prepared to leave, she turned back to Jack, a hint of hesitation in her posture. "Jack, I know you've got your life here, but if you're ever in the city and want to grab a coffee or just talk about cars, you know where to find me." Jack met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "I might just take you up on that." Susan's smile lingered as she climbed into her car. The engine purred to life, and with a final wave, she drove away, disappearing down the road. Jack watched her go, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet of the morning. Jack turned back to his garage, his hands slipping into his pockets. The day was just beginning, and already a few cars were pulling into the lot. A young couple stepped out of an older sedan, waving as they approached. "Mr. Harper," we heard. "You're the best in town," the man said, his tone earnest. Jack smiled, nodding toward the garage. "Let's take a look." As he walked toward the car, the restored classic Susan had brought him gleamed in the sunlight, a reminder of how far he had come and the possibilities still ahead. Jack glanced at it one last time before stepping inside, a quiet sense of contentment settling over him. The past no longer felt like a weight. Instead, it was a foundation, one that allowed him to move forward with confidence. And as the garage buzzed with new life, Jack couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold, not just for his work, but for the unexpected connection that had begun to take shape. The story ends with Jack standing in the doorway of his garage, watching the world go by. His smile is soft but resolute, a man at peace with where he is and open to whatever comes next. And that's the end of our heartfelt journey with a mechanic helped fix a stranger's flat tire. He had no idea that she was a billionaire. What did you think about Jack's incredible transformation and his unexpected connection with Susan? Do you believe small acts of kindness can truly change lives in such profound ways? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And while you're at it, tell us, where are you watching this video from? We're excited to know where our stories are reaching and connecting people all over the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everyone deserves a little inspiration in their day. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you'll never miss another powerful story like this one. We're here to bring you tales that inspire, move, and remind you of the beauty in the simplest acts. Thank you so much for watching and staying with us until the very end. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and remember, the smallest gestures often have the biggest impacts. See you in the next story.